Good evening. This is the I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm Lucy Arish, and these are the headlines. As the clock ticks ahead of a U.S. framework for peace, the boycott issues heats up around Israel with words exchanged from both U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. 5 citizens go to the polls in a much-anticipated election, but between opposition demonstrations and boycotts, can it break the country's political deadlock? And the settlement issue from an entirely different angle. Left-wing Israeli activists set up Palestinian settlements inside Israeli territory. Welcome back again. The war of words on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process blew up again over the weekend following comments made by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry warning Israel from an increasing delegitimization campaign. Kerry's remarks sparked an outcry in the Israeli government and a harsh response from the Israeli right. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev has the story.
Another week starts in the Middle East with the Israeli-Palestinian process high on the agenda. The U.S. pressure on Netanyahu and Abbas to reach a framework agreement is mounting, and the exchange of rhetoric between Washington, Jerusalem, and Ramallah is reaching new highs. This time, the key word is boycott.
You see, for Israel, there's an increasing delegitimization campaign that has been building up. People are very sensitive to it. There's talk of boycotts and other kinds of things.
The U.S. Secretary of State, speaking at the Munich Security Conference, reiterated his position that the status quo is unsustainable, but his boycott warning hit a sensitive Israeli nerve. The Israeli Prime Minister brushed away Kerry's warnings, claiming that it only made the Palestinians more obdurate in their positions.
The attempts to boycott the State of Israel are immoral and unjustified. Besides, they will not accomplish their goal.
Netanyahu, however, was relatively diplomatic. His fellow cabinet ministers were less polite.
I think that what Secretary Kerry said in München is totally unacceptable.
Kerry's approach disturbs me. It's not responsible and it's not fair enough.
The Jewish Home Party chairman Naftali Bennett, who dedicated last week to slamming Netanyahu, went so far as to accuse Kerry of serving as a mouthpiece for anti-Semitism. The State Department issued a response to the political attack, stressing that Kerry's only reference to a boycott was, quote, a description of actions undertaken by others that he has always opposed. But it seems like the secretary is getting used to the criticism. After being called obsessive and messianic by the defense minister, last week he was the subject of a special prayer in the Western Wall.
I'm a little surprised by some of the articles that tend to write about an obsession or a fanatical effort to try to achieve this, etc. We're just working hard.
At least for the upcoming weeks, Kerry is determined to continue his efforts, hoping he can finalize a framework document that both Netanyahu and Abbas can agree upon.
Joining me now from the Israeli Foreign Ministry is its spokesman, Yigal Palmor. Good evening. So, Yigal, from who are the main threats in terms of boycotts?
There are no real threats. You have all these pro-Palestinian organizations in Western Europe or the United States. They're very small, they're making a lot of noise. This is unpleasant background noise. They have not affected Israeli exports in any way. They have created some harm very locally in one store there or in one supermarket here, but this gets a lot of media attention. But by and large, it's not a wide-ranging phenomenon that is presenting any threat. Now, it is a background noise that is causing concern as such because it gets into the minds of people and you don't know what kind of impression it leaves them. This is something that, of course, we must address. But I wouldn't speak about a threat. This is not threatening.
Mr. Palmor, if Israel's position is that boycotts are not right, how do you convey the message internationally that they don't achieve their purpose?
Well, that's precisely the point. I don't want to convey any message regarding the boycotts, because by doing so, I will only empower them and give them an importance that they don't have. I will give them a weight that they don't have and they don't deserve to have. So basically, you're asking me questions, I agree to talk to you. We are talking about something because everybody else is talking about it. But if it were up to us, there wouldn't be any communication or messaging about this campaign. It could, remain what it's always been. Unpleasant background noise, that's all there is to it. And as for specific political steps, specific policies by governments, these are not boycotts. These are policies with which we may disagree, with which we may differ, and the place to address this is in the proper diplomatic channels.
Mr. Yigal Palmor, thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Lucy.
And now for a look at the Palestinian perspective on the boycott issue. Joining me is Dimitri Diliani, member of the Fatah Revolutionary Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So let's try to understand something. Most of the places that are threatened to be boycott, like Sada Stream, for example, are also employing Palestinians. These places, if they're boycotting like this, could end up with a lot of Palestinians losing their jobs.
Actually, what you're saying now is very similar to defending the plantations because they hired slaves and they offered them food. And you would wonder, what would the slaves do then if they didn't have these jobs on the plantations? This is totally unacceptable because these settlements were built on the same people's lands. These factories are built on these people's lands. If the settlements were not there, they would be cultivating their land. Probably they would own such factories rather than working with them. The Palestinian cause is not a welfare issue. But there are a couple of points I want to make clear. First of all, the boycott is not targeted towards Israel. It's targeted towards the illegal settlements that are illegal by the international law.
This we know, but Mr. Diliani, nobody's pointing a gun at their heads to actually go and work there.
Of course not, but when you suffocate their towns through military checkpoints, when you prohibit them and you kind of paralyze their economy, people have to make ends meet. They have families. These people have to work anywhere. Of course, nobody forcing them to work. And of course, they are getting paid for the jobs they're doing. They're not getting the same rights. And I don't want to go into it as if it is a labor issue or unemployment issue. It's a political issue. We're talking about settlements are built illegally on Palestinian land, hiring low-wage Palestinians below standards, using them to work semi-slave-like on their own land, and they are being boycotted.
So, Mr. Diliani,
world that doesn't accept this anymore.
Mr. Diliani, let's try to look at it from a different angle. Boycotting is a two-way road. The Palestinians can find themselves being boycotted on the way, like by the way, on the way that they are treating women, for example.
Well, the way that Palestinians are treating women is much better than many other countries, and women have more rights in Palestine that religious Jews do give their own women rights. Women in Palestinian law are equal to men, while women in Jewish law are not equal to men. So we can do that also at another boycott instead of in addition to the settlement activity, to the treatment of Jewish women within religious circles in Israel.
Mr. Diliani, we hope that women will get equal rights like men everywhere, all around the world. Thank you very much for this. And we're moving on. Iran's nuclear program took center stage at the Munich Security Conference today. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif vowed to negotiate in good faith in order to reach an agreement with world powers over its nuclear program. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblazer reports.
Does Iran's nuclear program pose the greatest threat to global safety? This was the focus on Sunday of an international community divided on so many issues as the Islamic Republic took center stage at the annual Munich Security Conference. Following a rare meeting with his U.S. counterpart, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif expressed optimism.
I believe we are at that historical crossroad, that we can establish the type of relations between Iran and this international community That can, in and of itself, be the best guarantee that it would be foolish for either side to break away from.
Zarif's conciliatory statement comes one day after Iran confirmed receipt of $500 million in sanctions relief as part of an interim accord signed with world powers. The news was greeted with a message of an altogether different tone. Zarif defiantly compared Tehran's development of nuclear technology to one's right to breathe and said that science is in no way related to nuclear proliferation. In an even rarer occurrence, sitting just meters away from Zarif today was Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon, who addressed Iran's nuclear progress.
They came to the table as a result of the economic situation. They want to gain hegemony in the region. It's very important for them to improve their economy, but they will exploit this time available in the coming years to make progress, at least as a military nuclear threshold state.
On Saturday, the summit was dominated by developments in Ukraine and Syria, conflicts pitting the United States and Russia on opposing sides. Washington called on Moscow to pressure Syrian President Bashar Assad to accelerate the removal of chemical weapons from the country, an operation that is nearly 2 months behind schedule. The former Cold War foes also exchanged angry words in a tug-of-war over Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry accused Moscow of coercing Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, whereas Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that Washington was fomenting violent protests. With ongoing conflicts dominating the agenda, the question begs, can any amount of conferences truly make the world a more secure place?
Yes, and joining me right now in the studio is Eldad Pardo, Iran expert at the Hebrew University. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi.
So let me understand something. I need to understand what game the Iranian regime is trying to play.
About what?
About the centrifuges, because they're saying that they're not going to give up on research on centrifuges.
Of course, they didn't sign any. They have no commitment to stop researching on centrifuges. By the way, they did the same thing exactly, and it was the same guy, Rouhani, in 2003. They signed an agreement to suspend all enrichment, but at the time there was in Isfahan this UCF factory this was transformation of uranium from the yellow cakes and all that. They needed much work there, so they suspended it. They worked on the other element and went back. That's just, they do homework much more thoroughly than others.
So what is the main purpose to get to Munich?
Well, that's where you get to talk with each other. It's not these many people, much media events do not have any particular significance, but it's an opportunity to coordinate. There are a lot of interests that are common to the U.S. and Iran now.
So it's part of the, let's say, think tank, their way to ease into the West again, we can say.
Well, that's a big question, because the question is, where is Iran heading? And there is no answer for that. There is only one person who knows, or perhaps believes he knows the answer, and this is Mr. Khamenei. And we have to wait and see whether he's healthy and whether he is in control the way he believes he is.
So if we're saying that we don't know what their goals are, and from what we are anticipating or thinking what the goals are, did their goals change?
No, basically, I would say that we have here a collapse of two vectors. One vector was definitely the regime, the sanctions, and a lot of pressure was put upon them. The other vector was that the nuclear project reached some kind of maturation, and they wanted to, make it legal, to go out of the closet with it. So what they really would like to have is all the technology, all the possibility to become a threshold country and legalize it. And they play the game, and I believe that the Americans go with them. So the Americans would assume that they will have some kind of nuclear potential. The debate is, how many months will it take?
So to eat the cake, but leave it whole.
Or the yellow cake.
Oh, yes, the yellow cake, like Benjamin Netanyahu said. Eldad Pardo, thank you very much for this. Thailand is still waiting for voting results after the Election Commission decided to postpone the announcement following protesters blocking poll stations across the country. I-24 News reporter Uli Shapira has the latest.
Under a heavy cloud of tension, Thailand went to the polls Sunday. The results might affect the future of the country, whether it will be another round of violence or a long-awaited return to stability in the Southeast Asian country.
They are not using democratic system. The next people will protest the same way they are now. I insist that I do not hurt anyone. I just projected my rights. I believe that voting is the peaceful solution.
Masses of protesters blocked polling stations earlier on Sunday to disrupt the election procedure. The government had to postpone announcing election results after voting was cancelled in at least 12% of the polls due to protests. The opposition supporters note that the chances to win the election are extremely slim, if not impossible, as the early elections left them no time to prepare and to arrive at a proper candidate. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra is still not fully confident in her victory.
I cannot say anything this morning. We need to wait and see.
The early elections come as a result of the mass protests in the country that pitted Yingluck Shinawatra's administration against the opposition. The demonstrations reached their peak last November after an amnesty law was proposed that would have let former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra return to his country after years of living abroad due to corruption charges. Now, the angry Thais will have to reassess their next step and perhaps re-estimate the democratic standards in their country.
And joining me right now from Bangkok is Alon Miller. Good evening, Alon.
Good evening.
So what is the opposition trying to achieve in not participating in the elections?
In general, to jeopardize the election themselves. And they sort of could do it because 28 provinces in the south could not go to election today. The polls were closed today, and from the morning we knew already that they will have to most probably make some re-election or whatever in those provinces. And actually today we won't know the real results of the elections because you have to wait for we have already the pre-election and the present election, now the main elections, and now we're going to have also a post-election that the elections that will come most probably in 2 weeks for the 28 provinces that could not have election today. And only after that, they will make all the calculation together, and then they will decide who will be the next party to lead the country and the next Prime Minister.
Yes, Alon, how can you describe the mood in the streets today?
Very hard to say. In the morning, or let's say yesterday, was quite tension. You felt it really in the air. Everybody, what's going to be tomorrow and what's going to happen. I think many people woke up today in the morning the election opened 8 o'clock and everybody woken up, to see if something happened during the night or what will happen with the election itself. I think the presence of the joint army and police together helped to make the elections in the south, in the north, in the center, and in the northeast quite smooth, including Bangkok. And only the problem, as I said, in the south, 28 provinces.
Yes, Alon Miller from Bangkok. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much.
Yes, of course, and we will keep on updating you about the polls and the elections in Bangkok in the next few hours and in the next few days. But before coming up on this evening edition, the settlement issue from an entirely different angle. Left-wing Israeli activists set up Palestinian settlements inside Israeli territory. And millions of fans get set for the ultimate American football face-off at this year's Super Bowl. Don't go anywhere. 2 minutes break, and I'll be back. Welcome back. Egypt is set to try 5 alleged officers from Israel's Mossad spy agency and 3 Egyptians on charges of spying for the Jewish state. Egyptian prosecutors have accused the 8 of espionage and supplying Israel with information impacting Egypt's national security. The trial, which begins on Wednesday, is expected to open with none of the Mossad agents present, as they are reportedly on the run. And we're moving on. Israel's finance minister has decided to suspend all transfers of public money to the settlements of the West Bank. This after allegations that the money was illegally serving political interests. I-24 News reporter Daniel Ziri explains.
Israeli Minister of Finance Yair Lapid will be freezing funding to settlements in the West Bank. The financial transfers will be suspended until the end of an investigation regarding their possible use for political ends. According to recent reports, funds dedicated to these settlements were illegally transferred to the Settlers Council Lobby Group, a right-wing organization representing settlers. The council allegedly used the money for activities which are against government policies. According to the allegations, the Israeli government had secretly transferred about 148 million shekels, the equivalent of close to $42 million, to local authorities in the settlements to compensate them for city taxes they did not receive because of the government-imposed settlement building freeze between 2009 and 2010. The funds were originally supposed to serve for security purposes as well as for school and kindergarten maintenance. Members of the council maintained that transferring money to the organization is completely legal and that local municipalities agree to help fund it because it represents their interests.
And we are staying in the West Bank, where the settlement movement has taken a unique turn. Some 300 Palestinians and Israeli activists has set up an unoccupied houses near Jericho in the Jordan Valley. They intended to denounce the Israeli presence in the territories. More from I-24 News correspondents Maxime Perez and Mael Ben Uliel.
The Palestinian flag is omnipresent over these wrecked houses, as if they mark the territory. We are a few miles away from the Jordanian border, on the land of Ein Khajla, an abandoned village which holds some vestiges from the biblical era. With the help of far left-wing militants, about 40 Palestinians from all over the West Bank settled here last Friday. The makeshift camp is their new home, but their action is mainly political, in a region which has become the newest obstacle in the negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, the Jordan Valley.
As a Palestinian, we refuse this plan and to give a message about this is all of Jordanian Valley is Palestinian, and we have the right to work and to stay and to build a village for our people here.
The conditions in this outpost are still basic: no water, no electricity. They use these palm branches to keep the place clean and to light a fire. Many have slept out in the open, a method that may recall the lifestyle of some Jewish settlers in the West Bank. These militants' objective is above all to impose facts on the ground.
This operation is a success. If we're able to stay, it will be a great achievement. Even if the Israelis come to expel us, at least we prove this land belongs to us. Even international law says this land is Palestinian.
This choice of action proves that the Jordan Valley has become a major stake in the peace process. Israel wants to keep it under its supervision, while the Americans want to limit their presence there to 10 years. The Palestinians, obviously, are not willing to accept that.
And still with Israel, Israel stands as one of the most advanced countries in technology and startup culture, but when it comes to the cost of living, its statistics are far from impressive.
Summer 2011, hundreds of thousands of Israelis occupied streets in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in protest against the cost of housing in Israel. 2 years after this tent protest that shook the entire country, almost nothing has changed for Israeli citizens. Beyond the cost of housing, the main preoccupation for the middle class and the needy still remains the cost of living. According to one statistician, prices in Israel are indeed higher than in many other developed countries.
Data from the OECD shows that the Israeli price index is 16% higher as compared to the average price in other member countries. That means that if the price index average is 100, the price index in Israel is 116.
Economic journalist Ilanit Chayut agrees with this analysis and points at the cause.
Prices in Israel are high, period. If we compare to the United States or European countries, the Israeli consumer pays 2 or 3 times as much for all kinds of products, including local ones. What happened? 10 or 15 years ago, while prices were reasonable in Israel, big companies started to buy small and medium companies, and the state turned a blind eye. So those companies kept growing, and it resulted in a market without competition.
Itzik Alrov, who founded a consumer organization, shares the opinion. He claims the state has to do more.
There should be no reason for the Israeli consumer to pay such high prices if it wasn't for the fact that big companies abuse their power. They take advantage of the lack of competition in the market to higher prices. The government must reconsider the problem and take action to increase competitiveness so that the price can decrease for everyone's sake.
And the last VAT increase hasn't made the situation any better.
There's another problem that needs to be considered. In Israel, the VAT rate is 18% on every consumer good, including bread. That leads to a high increase of prices.
Faced with alarming economic difficulties, thousands of Israelis decide to leave their country every year. 90% of those who now live abroad admit they aspire to a better standard of living.
And tonight, right after the evening edition, the world this week, a legend in the field of cybersecurity, Eugene Kaspersky, elaborates on the threats and challenges of cyber warfare. Here's an excerpt.
Are we heading towards a World War III in cyberspace, as some say?
I believe it's very dangerous because we depend on IT. It's everywhere. There are power plants, power grids, transportation, healthcare. So if there is some visible damage on these systems, actually we will get back to the pre-internet time.
So how do you contain it? I mean, you know, when there's a weapon, people use it.
Unfortunately, yes, from time to time there are such weapons which are used by people, but remember, there are such things as nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, which are simply forbidden. And I hope that very soon governments will agree not to use cyber weapons and make cyber weapons forbidden as well.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy. I mean, you think cyber weapons is as dangerous as nuclear or biological?
Once again, if we are in a cyber war, I think that the damage, the possible damage on the whole world will be as huge, as big as a real Third World War.
And of course, for the full interview, tune into The World This Week with Jacob Elon after this evening edition at 7:40 GMT. In her first public declaration, Woody Allen's daughter, Dylan Farrow, has accused her acclaimed filmmaker of sexuality assaulting her when she was 7, reviving one of Hollywood's most notorious scandals. I-24 News correspondent Jaffa Port has the story.
What's your favorite Woody Allen movie? It is with these words that Dylan Farrow, Woody Allen's adopted daughter, opens her first ever publicly written claim of sexual abuse against the filmmaker. In a letter published Saturday on the New York Times website, she questioned his acclaim in Hollywood, describing the abuse which allegedly occurred when she was 7 years old.
These things happen so often, so routinely, so skillfully hidden from a mother that would have protected me had she known, that I thought it was normal. I thought this was how fathers doted on their daughters. But what he did to me in the attic felt different. I couldn't keep the secret anymore.
Although a painful and devastating description, the detailed sexual abuse allegations are ones the world has known about and has largely chosen to ignore for more than 20 years. The initial claims surfaced following the 1992 split of the filmmaker and his longtime girlfriend, actress Mia Farrow, amid revelations that Allen had an affair with Farrow's adopted daughter, Soon Yi, who was about 20 years old at the time. The accusations filled the headlines, but after a police investigation, Allen was never arrested or prosecuted and has consistently denied wrongdoing.
A gigantic industry has been built on a total non-event. And when I say total non-event, I mean a total non-event. It wasn't as if, you know, I tickled my daughter or something and much has been exaggerated. I'm saying nothing at all.
The revival of the accusation against Allen comes just after he received the Golden Globe Lifetime Achievement Award. During the ceremony, his friend and collaborator Diane Keaton accepted the prize on his behalf, while both Mia Farrow and her son Ronan criticized Hollywood for celebrating Allen and tweeted their resentment to the award.
Missed the Woody Allen tribute. Did they put the part where a woman publicly confirmed he molested her at age 7 before or after Annie Hall?
A woman has publicly detailed Woody Allen's molestation of her at age 7. Golden Globe tribute showed contempt for her and all abuse survivors.
Ahead of this year's Oscars, where the 78-year-old filmmaker is nominated for Best Original Screenplay for his drama Blue Jasmine, Dylan rhetorically asks in her column some of Allen's recent actors, Cate Blanchett, Alec Baldwin and Scarlett Johansson, to imagine how they would feel if their child had been sexually abused. So far, none have agreed to comment. And so the question remains, how will Hollywood react, if at all, to this round of allegations against one of its most prized directors?
And it's a very big night in the United States ahead of the Super Bowl. Joining me now from the center of the excitement near the New Jersey Stadium is CBS News Beth Sports Director Mark Smith. Good evening. Thank you very much for this phone call.
Thank you for having me.
So you're out there covering the whole thing, the Super Bowl preparations. What does it look like so far?
So far, it's pretty uneventful. I mean, we've been blessed with some really good weather today. It's in the mid 40s. Not nearly as cold as it was earlier in the week. The biggest concern that a lot of us had was there going to be a snowstorm, but it looks like we've dodged that bullet, so to speak. Right now, we're at a tailgate party in East Rutherford, New Jersey, near the stadium. The reason why is they're not allowing any tailgating in the stadium parking lot, and they've limited the number of parking passes to the general public to only a few thousand, which is contrary to what they do for Giant and Jet games.
Mark, how unlikely is this matchup between Seattle and Denver?
It's unlikely in the sense that these two were actually division rivals in the AFC West about a decade ago. They were both in the same division, which means that they would never faced each other in the Super Bowl. But since the NFL had realignment, then Seattle is now in the NFC, and Denver is in the AFC, the National Football Conference and the American Football Conference.
If Seattle is going to win, it's going to be their first time?
I'm sorry?
If Seattle is going to win this game, it's going to be their first time?
If they were to win, this would be their first Super Bowl. They had made the Super Bowl a few years back and lost to Pittsburgh. This would be their first Super Bowl. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of Seattle fans here. I was very surprised at how many Seattle fans made the trip east for this trip. I mean, they're considerable presence here.
Mark, how are you preparing yourself for the big game?
We're prepping right now. Right now, we're just shooting. Basically, we're just shooting some fan stuff, and then we're going to go into the stadium in a little while and prep for the game. It's it should be a great game. I mean, the two best, the best defense in football versus the best offense in football, and Peyton Manning.
Yeah, Mark Smith, thank you very much for this phone call, and have fun. And with me in the studio, our own sports anchor, Jonathan Regev. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Lucy. I'm fine. Yourself?
Are you going to watch the Super Bowl tonight?
Yes, I will.
Of course you will. But you came to speak about
Sochi Olympics tonight. Obviously, all the focus will be on the Super Bowl in New Jersey. As of tomorrow, everyone will speak of Sochi because the opening ceremony is this coming Friday, right around the corner. And we'll begin with the American delegation. As interesting as it may sound, this is the first time an American delegation has arrived to, let's call it the former Soviet Union for Olympics game, for any Olympics. Why is that? When back then the Soviet Union hosted the 1980 Moscow Olympics. The United States boycotted those games. Back then it was because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
This whole evening edition is boycotting.
Boycotting?
Boycotted.
Oh my God.
We're going to be boycotted by the end of the evening.
No one boycotts me. So the American delegation is there now. Seems like the athletes, obviously, they're very happy. They're there to compete. But as far as the nations are concerned, the leaders, let's call it, there's a lot of tension between Washington and Moscow, obviously, with the anti-gay legislation in Russia. This is the first time since the 2000 Sydney Olympics in which the United States will not be represented in the opening ceremony by either the president, the first lady, or a former president, or the vice president, as they say. Let's remember, in 2012 in London, 2 years ago, Michelle Obama was there. Yeah. This time, no, not even a cabinet minister because of the anti-gay legislation. But who will head the delegation of the White House? Billie Jean King, one of the most notable lesbian tennis players of all times. She is the one that President Obama decided to send over to Russia to send a clear message. We do not accept your legislation. Yes, you may host the Olympics, but we don't accept.
But the athletes are not concerned about.
Of course not. By the way, there are two known gay athletes in the American delegation, and President Obama said himself, it's very important to send those athletes to Russia to say, you may do whatever you want, we do not accept it, we send our athletes the ones we decide to send.
And you showed us a lot of places that the Olympic flame was traveling to.
The Olympic torch relay to Sochi has been beautiful. We've seen it over here. We've seen it in the North Pole, up in space, down in the ocean. Beautiful places. Another place the Olympic flame conquered, apparently back in October, is the highest point in Europe, Mount Erebus in the Caucasus, a height of a bit over 5,600 meters. Why was it in October and not now? Because now we're in the middle of winter. It's impossible to ascend to those heights. So the Olympic flame was back there in October.
Wow.
The pictures are released now because the Olympic...
I see it.
Beautiful pictures, by the way.
Pictures.
And the flame passed by the mountain recently. Now they released the pictures.
They're yelling
Beautiful.
at me at the control room to end this corner. I'm sorry,
I'm
Jonathan,
so excited
but
with the Sochi Olympics.
Thank you very much for this.
Nice to have you.
Go see the football.
Yes, I will.
Super Bowl.
Super Bowl, football. American
football. Super Bowl. Yes.
We understand each other.
Thank you very much. And still ahead on this I-24 News Evening Edition. The Daily Debate. 35 years ago, the Iranian Revolution created a new Middle East. A look at the reality it has shaped until today. And on One, a special interview with the man who saw a very different world up close. We sit down with Israel's former ambassador to Iran. Don't go anywhere. 2 minutes break, and I'll be back.